I woke before first light to a sleeping bag stiff with frost and a canteen so cold it burned where it touched skin. Fire had gone to ash. Birds weren't moving. I'd camped here before and the ground looked fine. Flat, sheltered, easy trail access. By 4 in the morning, it was a problem. Old Appalachian campers knew things about cold that never made it into any gear catalog. At number 6, the campsite mistake most people make before they ever unpack. At number 2, the one thing every old-timer did last before sleep. Subscribe if this is your kind. Number 10, ground before air. Most people shopping for a cold weather camp setup spend their time comparing sleeping bag ratings, temperature ratings, fill power, synthetic versus down. I understand the impulse, but the old-timers I learned from weren't nearly as focused on what covered them as they were on what was under them. Cold ground pulls heat out of a body faster than cold air does, considerably faster. The physics of it aren't complicated. Conduction through dense material is more efficient than convection through moving air, and the ground is in direct contact with you all night. A sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees does most of its insulating work on your top half. Your backside, pressed against the ground, is where the real heat loss happens. I learned this the hard way one October. I had a bag I trusted, a decent tarp, and nothing between me and the dirt. By midnight, I was shivering in a bag that should have kept me comfortable. The bag wasn't the problem. I was losing heat downward the whole time, and the bag couldn't compensate for it. Old camps in these mountains used whatever was available. Pine boughs, dry leaves packed thick enough to compress under weight and still provide a finger or two of loft, a folded wool blanket set flat before the bedroll went down. The goal was dead air between the body and the earth. The material almost didn't matter as long as it wasn't wet, and it had some thickness to it. Modern foam pads work fine for this, but a lot of people undersize them, or skip them when they're heavy, or use inflatable pads that compress under body weight and lose most of their insulating value. The ground will take everything you have if you let it. Start there before you spend another $1 on a bag. Number 9, feed the fire right. There's a particular way a campfire looks when someone has built it for heat rather than company. It isn't wide, it isn't flashy, the wood is dense, set close, and there's a deliberate log placed at the back that isn't there for the flames. It's there for the coals. Most campfires are built for the evening. They burn bright, they're comfortable to sit beside, and they go out sometime after you do. That's fine for a summer night in May. It isn't fine when the temperature is dropping into the 20s and you're depending on residual warmth to make it through until morning. Hardwoods make coals, softwoods make flame. Oak, hickory, ash, these burn long and hot and leave a coal bed that holds heat for hours. Pine and poplar burn hot fast and leave almost nothing. I watched an older man set his fire on a cold November night by laying his kindling, getting his pine going for the quick heat, and then placing 2 dense oak logs in a tight V at the back as soon as the fire was established. He raked the coals forward before he turned in. By morning, there were still coals under the ash, and the camp was warmer than it had any right to be. A fire that looks impressive at 9 in the evening can leave you in cold ash by 2 in the morning. Banking coals is the difference. Push the large hardwood pieces together before sleep. Rake the coal bed forward if you have a good accumulation, and leave the airflow restricted enough to slow the burn without smothering it. It takes a few attempts to get the feel for it. The old-timers had done it enough times that it was automatic. Number 8, dress while you're still warm. A man on a ridge above my camp in November watched me sit down to rest and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Put your coat on now. You won't feel it coming." I was warm. I'd been moving uphill for 20 minutes, and I was generating heat without effort. I told him I was fine. I was fine for about 4 more minutes. The instinct to add a layer when you feel cold is wrong in cold weather. By the time you feel cold in a meaningful way, your body has already begun reducing blood flow to your extremities to protect your core. You're behind. The heat you lost on the way to feeling cold is heat your body now has to work to replace, and it does that by burning calories and producing shivering, both of which are expensive. Appalachian practice was to layer up before the chill set in, specifically before stopping to rest after exertion, before sitting down at camp in the evening, and before lying down to sleep. The window for this is narrow, and it doesn't feel urgent when you're in it. That's why it works against you. You're comfortable, the coat is in the pack, and you don't reach for it until you wish you had. A dry wool layer added before you cool down keeps the heat you generated from exertion trapped close to the body. Once that heat is gone, getting it back costs more than keeping it would have. Cold doesn't announce itself, it just arrives, and by then the conversation about what you should have done is over. Now, the first three numbers have all been about the body, what you're sleeping on, how your fire is burning, when you put your coat on. They look like separate tips. They aren't. Every one of them is the same action repeated in a different form, acting before there's a problem, rather than reacting after one has started. The old-timers in these mountains didn't have better gear. They had better habits, and those habits were built around noticing early signs and responding to them while there was still time. What comes next isn't about your equipment at all. It's about the ground you're standing on and what it tells you before you ever set up camp. Number 7, read the hollow. Cold air is heavy. Most people know this in an abstract way, but it has a specific practical meaning when you're choosing where to sleep. On a still, clear night, the kind that produces hard frost, cold air drains off the ridges and slopes and flows downhill the same way water does. It pools in the hollows, the valley floors, the low places between ridges. A campsite 40 feet up a slope from a hollow floor can be 10 or 15 degrees warmer than the bottom of that hollow on a still night. Not a little warmer, significantly warmer. I've watched this in November. Frost forms in the low ground first, sometimes an hour before it reaches higher spots. You can see the frost line on a hillside in early morning light, a clear boundary where white stops and dry ground begins. Below that line, the temperature was enough to freeze standing moisture. Above it, it wasn't. The prettiest campsite in a hollow is almost always the coldest spot in the surrounding terrain. Flat ground is appealing. Easy water access is appealing. A hollow looks sheltered, and it is sheltered from wind. But on a still night, that shelter fills up with the coldest air on the mountain, and you're sleeping at the bottom of it. Slope sites require more work to level and stake. They're less intuitive, but on a clear night in late October or November, a slight elevation above the drainage point is worth more than any additional insulation you could add to your kit. Number 6, the mistake made before you unpack. This is the one I mentioned at the start. I made it myself on a ridgeline camp years ago, and I've watched other people make it more times than I can count. It has nothing to do with the gear you brought, the bag you're using, or the food you packed. It's direction. Before a single stake goes into the ground, you need to know which way the wind is moving. And you need to set your shelter so the opening is not facing into it. In the southern Appalachians in winter, the prevailing wind comes out of the northwest. A tent door facing northwest on a cold night isn't a shelter, it's a funnel. The wind comes straight in, hits your sleeping bag, and the temperature rating on that bag becomes theoretical. I woke up on that ridgeline camp to wind driving cold through a tent door I'd pitched toward what I thought was a good morning view. It was maybe 22 degrees. The inside of the tent was barely warmer than outside because cold air was moving through it continuously. The fix takes 30 seconds. Before you stake anything, light a match or watch the smoke from a small fire. See which way it moves. Orient the back of your shelter into that wind, not the door. In broken terrain, that sometimes means giving up the flat spot or the water access. Take the worst site with the better orientation. The mountain doesn't care about your view. Number 5, the wet warning. People associate hypothermia with extreme cold. Single digits, blizzards, ice. In these mountains, some of the most dangerous nights I've seen came in spring, April, sometimes even early May, when the rain came in at 45 degrees and somebody had cotton against their skin. Wet cotton and wind at 45 degrees will kill a person. The temperature doesn't need to be extreme. Water conducts heat away from the body far more efficiently than air does, and wind accelerates that process. A soaked cotton shirt against the torso in moving air is roughly equivalent to removing your insulation entirely. The body loses heat faster than it can generate it, and the process is quiet and progressive. Wool behaves differently when wet. It loses some insulating value, but it doesn't collapse completely the way cotton does. Synthetics designed for outdoor use behave similarly. Wax canvas sheds water without soaking through. These aren't modern inventions. Old-timers wore wool because they understood what happened to cotton in weather, even if they didn't describe it in terms of thermal conductivity. I've wrung water from a cotton shirt in April and felt the temperature drop on my hands just from holding it, then put on a wool layer that was damp on the outside and still warm against the skin. The difference is not subtle. If you're wearing cotton and you get wet in cold weather, getting it off your skin is the priority. not comfort, not dignity, not worrying about what comes next. The body gives warning signs before it shuts down. The question is whether you're paying enough attention to catch them early. Here's what I want you to notice about the last 5 numbers: ground insulation, fire banking, layering timing, terrain selection, wind orientation, wet fabric. Every one of these requires you to have thought ahead, to have looked at the ground before you laid out your bed, at the wood before you built the fire, at the sky before you chose the site. None of them work if you're responding after the problem has already arrived. Modern camping gear is sold on the idea that you can arrive unprepared and the equipment will handle it. A bag rated to 0 degrees, a waterproof tent, an emergency bivvy in the bottom of the pack. And sometimes that's true. But gear has failure points. Zippers freeze, tent seams leak, bags lose loft when they get wet, batteries die. The old way didn't depend on any single piece of equipment holding up under stress. It depended on the person knowing 2 or 3 ways to solve every problem before the problem showed up. The numbers ahead are about what happens when conditions change after you've made camp, and that's a different skill. Number 4, never sweat to stay warm. A younger version of me thought that moving hard in the cold was how you stayed warm. Hiking fast, hauling wood, keeping the body working. I was wrong, and I got corrected clearly enough that I didn't forget it. Slow down, you'll pay for that sweat tonight. The man who said it was carrying the same load I was, moving at about half the pace, jacket unzipped enough to vent. He wasn't struggling, he wasn't cold, he was managing his output deliberately rather than just moving as fast as he felt like moving. Sweat in cold weather wets the base layer. Once that layer is wet, it conducts heat away from the core, just the way wet cotton does in rain. You can feel warm while you're moving and generating heat. The moment you stop, to rest, to eat, to set up camp, that wet layer pulls heat out of you fast, and you have no dry insulation left to counter it. Appalachian practice was to stay just slightly cool while working. Not cold, not shivering, but never hot enough to break a real sweat. The jacket comes open on the uphill, closes on the flat, comes off temporarily in heavy work. It requires paying attention to what your body is doing rather than just pushing through until you reach the destination. A man carrying firewood on a 28-degree morning, moving steady in an open coat, is doing this right. He'll arrive at the woodpile dry. He'll put the coat back on before he cools down. He'll be warm 2 hours later when the temperature drops further. The one who overheats getting to the woodpile is the one who can't get warm by the fire that night. Number 3, the last hour rule. The hour before you go to sleep on a cold night isn't downtime. Old Appalachian cold weather practice treated it as a specific discipline, and once I understood why, the logic was hard to argue with. Somewhere in these mountains, on a November camp that had already turned hard cold by the time we were wrapping up for the night, an older man handed me a piece of cornbread with the fat from the morning's bacon poured into it and said, "Eat before you sleep. Your body burns it all night." He wasn't being folksy. He was describing a real mechanism, a calorie-dense food eaten before sleep. Fat, protein, slow carbohydrate gives the body fuel to burn through the night while it's maintaining core temperature in the cold. Going to sleep on an empty stomach or having saved all the good food for breakfast means the body is running on low fuel during the coldest hours, typically between 2 and 4 in the morning. That's when people wake up shivering and can't get back to sleep. Beyond food, do light movement in the last 15 minutes before lying down. Nothing strenuous. A slow walk around the camp, some arm movement, enough to bring the core temperature up a degree or two before you climb into the bag. Get into the bag warm, not already cold, and hoping the bag catches up. Change your socks. Put on the final layer before entering the bag, not once you're already in it and feeling cold. Bank the fire. Replace the wool hat. Do all of it standing up outside the bag while you can still do it comfortably. Going to sleep warm on a cold night is not luck. It's the product of the last 60 minutes of decisions. Number 2, what old campers always did last. At the very start, I told you there was one thing old Appalachian campers did last before sleep that almost nobody does anymore. Here it is. They warmed their feet. Not with electric socks, not with chemical hand warmers, though those exist now and they work. With a tin canteen filled with hot water from the fire, wrapped in a wool sock, and pushed to the bottom of the sleeping bag before lying down. The reason this works isn't complicated, but it isn't obvious either. When your body is under cold stress, it pulls blood away from the extremities, hands, feet, ears, and concentrates circulation in the core to protect the vital organs. Your feet get cold because the body is deprioritizing them. When you warm the feet externally, you're signaling the thermoregulatory system that the extremities are safe. Blood flow to the periphery opens back up. Core warmth follows. You fall asleep faster, and you sleep warmer through the night because your body isn't working against a signal that says everything below the ankle is already a lost cause. I knew a man who carried a specific tin canteen on every cold weather camp, whose only job was to be the foot warmer. He'd fill it from the boiling pot, wrap it in a sock to prevent direct contact burns, and slide it to the foot of his bedroll before he climbed in. He'd been doing it for 40 winters. He didn't think of it as a trick. He thought of it as the last step in going to sleep properly. A hot canteen costs nothing. It weighs as much as a canteen of water, which you'd carry anyway. It has no batteries to die, no chemical reaction to exhaust, no moving parts to fail. On a genuinely bad night at elevation, in wet cold, in a bag that's lost some of its loft, it might be the difference between a night you sleep through and a night you don't. All 10 numbers have pointed at the body, the terrain, the fire, the layers, the last hour ritual, the foot. Every one of them required something specific from you before the cold set in, which raises a question. What's the principle underneath all of them? What makes any of this work? That's number one, and it has nothing to do with equipment. The gap between gear and judgment is the most dangerous distance in cold weather camping. Modern outdoor culture has spent decades closing it by making better gear, higher rated bags, lighter insulation, more sophisticated layering systems, and the gear is good. I use some of it, but good gear is not a substitute for the thing that the old-timers in these mountains had and couldn't buy and can't be packaged. What they had was the discipline to notice. Number one, know before you're cold. Every skill in this countdown is a form of the same action, responding to a signal early enough for the response to matter. Insulating the ground before lying down is a response to the signal that says the earth will steal your heat. Banking hardwood coals is a response to the signal that says the fire's primary job is to last the night, not to look good. Layering before you feel cold is a response to the signal that says comfort and safety are not the same thing. Reading the hollow, checking the wind before you stake, all of it is signal recognition, not looking for the problem after it's arrived, looking for the conditions that will produce the problem, early enough to act. The body has its own signal system. Shivering is late stage. By the time you're shivering hard, you're already behind. The early signals are subtler. Hands that feel slightly clumsy, a chill across the shoulders, thinking that's slower than it should be for the task you're doing, a strange comfort feeling that comes with advanced cold and signals something has gone wrong rather than right. Old-timers learn to catch themselves at the first stage and respond there, not at the second or third. I've sat beside a fire going low on a cold night, watching the frost form on my jacket collar while my hands were still moving freely, and understood that I had maybe 30 minutes to address the situation before it addressed me. That window, right there, is everything. That's where the early numbers live. The ground check, the fire check, the layering check, the sight check. They all extend that window or prevent the window from closing in the first place. Discomfort is not a problem to eliminate. It's information to act on. Modern cold weather camping culture treats discomfort as a product failure. The bag wasn't warm enough. The jacket wasn't the right one. The tent let in too much draft. There's always another piece of gear that would have solved the problem. Old practice had a different frame. The situation changed. You noticed it, and you responded. You didn't outsource that awareness to a temperature rating on a stuff sack. The frost-stiff sleeping bag I woke up in before dawn, the one from the beginning of this, wasn't a product problem. It was the result of not paying attention to the hollow I'd chosen to sleep in, the fire I hadn't banked properly, and the last hour routine I'd skipped because I was tired. Every number in this countdown was a corrective for one of those failures, and the thing connecting all of them was attention, early and continuous, before the mountain forced the issue. The mountain doesn't care how expensive your sleeping bag is. It only responds to how well you're paying attention. Now here's what I want you to do. This week, before the next time you're out in the cold, pick one of these and actually practice it. Bank a fire properly before you sleep in it. Check your camp's orientation against the wind before you stake a single corner. Sleep one night on something between you and the floor and notice whether it changes the morning. You don't need a mountain to test most of what's in this list. You need a cold night and the willingness to pay attention to what it's telling you. Which one of these would you bring back? Which habit did someone in your family once know and stop passing down? Leave it in the comments. I read them. Knowledge weighs nothing. It needs no charging, and it works best on the coldest night you didn't plan for.